So, in far more luxurious settings than I'm delighted to be joined by director, cinematographer, showrunner, and an author again, Barry Sonnenfeld. Hello, Barry Sonnenfeld. How are you?
Good, Simon. How are you?
Well, I think I'm in far more wintry conditions than you, and I'm mildly jealous. Having just read your book as well, I feel inclined to check if shoes are in frame first. That was one of the key takeaways. Is it every actors always want to know if their shoes are in frame? It's just like it's just like okay. Um,
Actors never want to wear their prop shoes. They never fit right, or for some weird reason, they're always coming to the set. They don't have their wardrobe shoes on, and for some reason, the wardrobe person never brings the shoes with them to the set. So
okay.
we're always delayed while someone runs back to the camper to get their shoes.
Now I have your latest book behind me cunningly, which is hiding there. Best possible place, worst possible time. The key question that everyone wants to know off the back of it, putting to bed the entire clickbait era of the internet. Do you always wear two watches?
I
Have you
always
always
wear
done
two
that?
watches.
Can I ask why?
What happened? I'll tell you what happened. In February 1999,
Okay,
I was in a plane crash
I'm
in
coming to
Van
that.
Nuys Airport. And what happened was, after the plane crash, my wife, as an expensive joke, bought me this watch, which is called the Breitling Emergency. Now, the Breitling Emergency will send out a signal if you're lost hiking or you're in a plane crash. We'll send out two signals, one on the 121 point something megahertz thing that broadcasts to every EMT and police department. But the new version I have will also send a signal to satellites and so I will be rescued. The problem is once you have this watch, you can never take it off. The Jews have a phrase called the Kunahura. The Kunahura is the evil eye of God. So if I take
Right.
this watch off, God says, Schmuck, Sonnenfeld took his watch off, watch this, and then I'll be in an accident. So I can never take this off, but I own other watches. So since 1999, I have worn two watches. There are a few other people. Richard E. Grant wears two
Okay,
watches. Uh, Buzz Aldrin, the second man on the moon,
of course.
wears two watches. A guy named Brian Williams, who was an NBC newscaster, used to wear two watches. In fact, we bonded over our two watches. He's gone down to one, but I'm still loyal to the two.
So if this podcast takes off, there will be a Wikipedia page by about February, I reckon, on famous people who wear two watches. I just love the fact that we've had decades of space exploration. We've put satellites into orbit, spent billions, and it's to keep you safe. I find that particularly reassuring. Um,
Yeah, well, I'm an only child, so I
I've
must be
read
safe.
I've read both books. I should point out I have the first book here as well, which was I mean terrific. Barry Sonnenfeld, Call Your Mother. If anyone's just looking at that, and it's just I mean I got to the end of it, and again it sounds like the most stupid question, but did anyone mind? Particularly with the second book, that you've got a degree of candidness about some of the stories in there about like household names. And I'm not giving them away. I think people should discover most of these in the book. That's half the fun of it, I think. But did you get any pushback from that? And is there kind of a director's cut that's got another 30 pages where, I don't know, you tell us George Clooney's a zombie or something like that?
It's funny. I'm a big believer in editing. Whether it's a movie or a book, I vomit these books out. I'm writing about myself, so it's really easy. I'll write 30, 40 pages a day.
Right.
And it's interesting. I've been looking up how other writers write, and they all say the secret to writing is to sit in front of a keyboard and write, you
Yeah.
know. So I vomit these pages out, but then I start editing. My first book, I probably removed a third of it.
Yeah.
And in the second book, I probably removed a third of it. And there's even more stuff, more candid stuff about other actors and stuff. I didn't take anything out. Here's the truth. I don't think I'm particularly mean. I'm just
No, that's
honest,
exactly
which
what I've
is
written. There's no
unusual.
cruelty to what you're doing. But even so, from our side of the fence, it's just unusual that there is, again, I'm not giving away who it is. You've got a story in the book, for instance, of a major international movie star who got award nominated for a performance who hadn't learned their lines. I know you've spoken about it in other interviews, but hadn't learned their lines. And basically, it sounded like you had to rebuild their performance in the editing room as a result. And we don't hear that from where we sit. And I'm just
Yes.
wondering if you get some degree of pushback just for being so candid.
So far, not. I have not heard from, oh, for instance, John Travolta.
Just for
I
example.
haven't heard from Will Smith, for example, or Will
Okay.
Smith or Gene Hackman, Tommy Lee Jones. But in fact, there are people that feel who were on the set with me on various movies who felt I've been kind to some of these movie stars in not going further in truthful, candid discussions of what it was like to work with them. But the truth is, it's only about the end result.
Yeah.
So in the case of, oh, let's say, for example, John Travolta,
For example.
we he ended up winning the Golden Globe, you know.
Yeah.
So the truth is, it's and John is charming and lovely,
Yeah.
and he just couldn't learn his lines, you know.
There is a picture actually in your first book, which is the page that I've left it open at, and it's you on the set of Get Shorty. Oh God, I'll whack that just in case anyone can vaguely see that on camera. And it's you stood next to Gene Hackman brandishing a knife, standing over a birthday cake. And genuinely, it's
Yeah.
one of the most sinister pictures I've ever seen of a birthday celebration. Can I just read your caption out to people? My expression was due to the fear that Gene was going to spin around and plunge that knife into my chest. Just delicious. And the reason I bring him up is I spoke earlier this year to Andrew Davis, whose film
Mhm.
just creeps into your book. And Andrew
The
Davis had
package.
the package, yeah, had Tommy Lee Jones and Gene Hackman on the same movie. Now, again, I appreciate you've been asked quite a lot about the relationship with Tommy Lee Jones and Gene Hackman, and you've described them as tough. I just, one of the things that really kind of got me though was a comment that you quoted about Tommy Lee Jones at the press junket, I think it was, or the premiere for Men in Black, where he basically says that he does what you said, stand next to Will Smith, do what Barry Sonnenfeld tells me. When you crack the inverted commas difficult ones, do you get double satisfaction from moments like that?
Well, that quote was very satisfying because
I bet.
for 21 weeks, Tommy Lee Jones really bridled at my direction
Yeah.
because Tommy had never been in a comedy before and thought he needed to be funny.
Mm.
My whole philosophy, and it's not just me, it's many other directors as
I heard you
well
saying it
of
to Rob
comedies.
Reiner as well. Yeah.
Right. The secret is no one in your movie should act funny. They should just act the scene.
Yeah.
And if the scene is funny or absurd, then the audience will find where the comedy is. You know, I'm going to backtrack just a little bit. The first movie I directed was Addams Family,
Yep.
and I grew up looking at those Charles Addams drawings. And what's great about those drawings is he made the reader find the joke. You know, they were very
Yeah.
visual and he didn't point out the joke. You know, he didn't like point arrows at this is why this is funny. And I love when the audience thinks they're smarter than the director. I
Yeah.
like the audience to find the comedy. not to cut to a close up for the punchline, for instance. So Tommy tried to be funny, and I wouldn't let him be funny. And then he realized, oh, I get it. You don't have to act funny to be funny.
So I listened to a very, very long interview you did with Kevin Pollak, which must have been about 10, 15 years ago. You did this interview. And I
Yeah.
do want to just touch because you mentioned the plane. So I was going to come to this later. But there was half a story in there that you told to Kevin Pollak. And as much as I don't want you to replay the hits per se, I couldn't resist this at all. Because you've talked about the plane crash, and I found the news report of the plane crash as well about how you had to go straight to Warner Brothers to continue post production on Wild Wild West. So you lived so that we could have that
Right.
film
Pre-production, I think.
pre-production. I apologize.
Yeah, right.
But also what I didn't know was you'd cut a deal with Sony Pictures. You explained where you got 100 hours of private jet time as part of that deal. Is this correct? And Sony was so enraged when they found out they found the worst private jets they possibly could.
In effect, here's what happened. I had a producing partner, and we had an overall deal at Disney for movies,
Yeah,
but we're looking for a television deal as well. Sony uh, loved what I had done on Wild Wild West, so Sony Television made an overall deal with my company
yeah.
that included 100 hours. But the secret was it included 100 occupied hours. So
Okay.
what that meant is sometimes be deadheaded to me, so those hours wouldn't count, right? So in effect, it was almost like 200 hours. When and Business Affairs made the deal and all that, but when the head of Sony Television, who's now a good friend of mine, Eric Tannenbaum, heard this deal after it was signed, he said, he didn't say get the worst planes, he just said get the cheapest planes. And literally, we were flying into Van Nuys Airport. I was the only passenger on the plane. And at 14,000 feet, I knew I was dead. I was hearing klaxon sounds and beepings,
Yeah.
and um and what's funny is all my life I've been very afraid of flying. My quote is every time I get off an airplane, I view it as a failed suicide attempt. Every time I successfully
Yeah.
leave the plane. So I always knew I was going to die in a plane crash, and I've always been afraid of dying in a plane crash. I didn't die. I think what happened actually, and in the first book, I publish the actual black box discussion within
Yep.
the cockpit. They basically they ran out of fuel. And so they were staying high and then nosedived into Van Nuys Airport. We destroyed 5 airplanes, several pickup trucks. We were lodged against a palm tree in the parking lot when the plane finally came to a stop. I see 3 out of control human beings, a pilot, co-pilot, and flight attendant. I point out that there's liquid dripping onto the tarmac from one of the engines. They freak out, run past me because they couldn't open the door to the plane because it was lodged against that palm tree. They run past me, go through the luggage compartment, and leave the plane without telling me, follow me or any. They freaked out and left. I'm on this plane alone. And what happened, Simon, is after that, and people said, did you sue them? And I said, I can't sue them because it made me a better flyer.
And it
Because
got
now
you a
that I
watch.
experienced what died, well, and
Yeah,
I
yeah.
hadn't had the watch yet.
Yeah,
That's
yeah. No,
yeah,
that's
sweetie
the
bought me
reason.
the
Yeah.
watch. That's the reason I got it. But what happened was I realized if that's what it's like to die in a plane crash, okay, now I know what that's like, and I'll it wasn't that terrible.
Have
So
you
now
plotted?
I'm a
Have you?
better flyer.
I mean, have you plotted a different death now? Is there something you're going for that's a bit more extreme?
Oh, less violent, but every day I just wait for it to happen.
I just,
Uh,
I live by what is it? Leslie Nielsen's monologue in the Naked Gun about the best ways to die. So I'm going to get my nuts ripped off by a Laplander. That's mine. That's how I'm going.
Oh, I
Can I?
don't know. Don't do that.
No. Well, I'll try it once. Can I go right the way back to your photography, your cinematography work? Because your name comes up quite a
Mhm.
lot. Because we're huge fans of Blood Simple as well, and not least the shot that goes along the bar where you just lift the camera over a drunk person on the bar, which, with the best will in the world, I think if you were a trained cinematographer in the traditional sense, you wouldn't even have attempted that. I don't think. And here I am talking
Right.
about that shot, what, 40 years, nearly 40 years down the line. Are you conscious of the influence of the work on Blood Simple? Because we'd like talk to Jeremy Saulnier, who's done some terrific thrillers, and he modelled like his film Blue Ruin on it, for instance, and in part the way that it was shot as well. Are you conscious of like the ramifications of the work you've put out, the positive ones?
Ah, not really. It's look, the great thing about doing that movie was because it was our first movie. I had never been on a film set before.
Yeah,
Neither had Joel, neither had Ethan. We were totally free to take chances. If we failed, no one would have heard of us, and it just would have been a failure and we would have moved on. I would have continued to shoot, industrials and documentaries or whatever. So we had tremendous freedom.
yeah,
It was an independent movie. So there was no studio telling us. We looked at dailies and why would a camera boom up over a drunk? What's funny about that shot is I visited Joel and Ethan in the cutting room. They took almost a year to cut that
yeah.
movie and the shot was gone. And I said to Joel, "Why did you take the shot of us booming up over the drunk in the bar? Why did you take that out of the movie?" And Joel said, I don't know. I think Ethan and I thought it was a little too self-conscious." And I said, "Have you looked at the rest of the movie? Why pick on that shot? The whole movie is just a bunch of self-conscious shots." And so they put it back in. And what's interesting about that movie is our investors pretty much hated the movie. We
I
had a
remember
screening
that.
in New York that went terribly, terribly. No one ever laughed. None of the investors really knew it was a comedy,
Yeah,
tonally, it's a very interesting movie. Is it a comedy? Is it a thriller? Can it be both? Do you have to label movies? I don't know. So, um, yeah, between Blood Simple and then Raising Arizona, those two movies really, as a cinematographer, that got me the rest of my career, basically.
yeah. So I mean, you go from I mean Miller's Crossing. I have to name check because it's just gorgeous. Also, I'm very conscious you got married around the time of Miller's Crossing as well. Um, but
Right.
I was watching you. You recorded a video recently in the Criterion collection cupboard. And disappointingly, you only took 5 discs. And I thought, the rest of us, if we're getting in that cupboard, there's going to be damage if we only walk out with 5 discs. However, you mentioned something in Miller's Crossing, and I'm a heathen from the outside. So, can you explain what you mean when you said this? You talked there about on Miller's Crossing motivating the light and
Yes.
whether you needed to motivate the light. Pretend I'm totally thick. Can you tell me what that means?
Sure. For instance, I've got so many stories about motivated light.
Yeah,
So you're looking at me, and I've got a bright background behind me, but basically, there's a window on my right, camera left, no, camera right. Uh, there's a
yeah,
window on one side of on the camera right side of the frame. So if I were to light me, theoretically, the light should come from the same direction that the window is at. It should be coming from my personal right side.
yeah,
However, if I'm looking like that, if I'm looking three-quarter to the left, I would look much better if I was lit from what I call the short side. There's a big broad side to my
Yeah, yeah,
face from the window side, but if I light it from the short side, I will look much better. If I was a cameraman right now, I would put a big light on my short side, even though obviously the main light is coming from the window.
yeah,
So I would not be motivating the light. Motivationally, the light should be coming from the window, but that's not always going to allow for the best lighting on an actor.
yeah,
And I think it's really important that actors be lit beautifully. So on Miller's Crossing, the very first shot looking at Gabe Byrne, Gabe is lit from his short side, but then when you cut wide, you see there's a lamp
yeah.
on the other side, and that side of his face is darker than the side of the frame that should
Interesting.
be lighter because there's a lamp right next to him. And I remember on Addams Family when I hired Owen Roisman, I said I want Morticia to have her own motivated light, even
Yeah,
if she's right next to the window. Light her like a Harrell photograph where she's got just light in her eyes, no matter where. And Owen loved that idea. And all these great cinematographers are always into motivating the light, putting a lamp so they could have a reason to have the light from that side. In fact, Blood Simple played at a film festival where Nestor Almendros, one of the great cinematographers, was a judge. And there's a scene in Blood Simple near the end that's probably the most iconographic scene in Blood Simple, where M. Emmett Walsh is shooting holes from a bathroom wall, shooting holes
yeah.
in the wall, and beams of light shoot out across the frame. And of course that light isn't motivated. Bathroom lights are big, broad, soft lighting. There's no like lights in the bathroom that would send shards of light across the frame. And Nestor said to Joel and Ethan, I love that scene, but the light isn't motivated. Well, if I motivated the light, it would be a nothing burger of a scene.
Yeah.
So put the lights where people will look good and don't worry about where the light should be coming from.
So when you were doing this, I mean, Blood Simple was made out of the glare of people, so to speak. By the time you're shooting things
Right.
like Misery and Throw Mama from the Train, it's a little bit more in the glare. And I mean, I've just been listening to an interview with people from Aardman, for instance, and Aardman are very, very in their own way of doing things, not in an arrogant way or anything like that. But they were talking about some of the notes they got back from Netflix on their most recent film about would they say that and would they say that and would they say that. And recently I've been looking at how John Hughes dealt with how protected his directors and dealt with studio notes as well about just tell them to call me, they call him, and then he would never call them back. What kind of pushback were you
Right.
getting and what kind of shield did you have against it?
Well, as a cameraman, I was shielded entirely by that.
Yeah,
In the case of working on Blood Simple, Miller's Crossing, and Raising Arizona, those were all pretty much done independently.
yeah,
And the Coens, their theory about pushback is we're doing it our way, or we'll find another studio. In fact, recently, about maybe 5, 6 years ago, I visited Joel and Ethan on the set of their movie, Ballad of Buster Scruggs,
yeah,
that they did for Netflix.
yeah.
And I visited them because they were shooting near me in Telluride, Colorado. And I looked at their camera and I said, "You're shooting on an Alexis, which is the best Aeroflex camera, but Netflix doesn't allow you to use an Alexa, and the reason is because the Alexa only put out 3.8K, and Netflix insisted every camera had to be shot with a 4K camera. So I wasn't allowed to use the Alexa on 3 years of a series of unfortunate events. And I said, how are you using an Alexa? You're not allowed to. And Joe and Ethan said, well, yeah, no, Netflix told us that. So we said, all right, we'll go to a different studio. So Netflix said, well, okay, just don't tell anybody. So anyway, so there you have it. So, but studio notes. I was very lucky when I worked for Netflix. It was an earlier Netflix. It was
Yeah,
early in their original programming. I was a showrunner for 3 years on
of
a series
course.
of unfortunate events, and I remember getting the first set of notes after I showed a rough cut of the first two episodes to them,
Yeah.
and they sent Brian Wright, who is assigned to our show, sent me some notes. And I said, do you want me to do all these notes or just the ones I know might be work? Or do you want to see everything, even if I think that it won't work, your suggestions? And Brian said, it's your show. These are just suggestions. Do whatever you want. This is your show. And I said, well, it's really your show. And he said, we don't see it that way. That's the old Netflix. Now I
Yeah.
have to move myself because I don't like the motivated light I'm dealing with right now. So let me find a way to get out of that sun. The sun is coming around. It's going to be a real problem here
Oh, but you look
at some
beautiful,
point,
Barry.
but we'll see how this that'll be the day. So I'm going to start to get overlit, but we'll see how this goes. The background isn't as good,
For
but I
those
don't
for
have a
those
Kermit
who are
back.
listening to the
I,
audio version of this, they're really going to appreciate the extra detail we've gone into to get this right. I love that. I love that. The first time I heard your name, or read about your name, was
mm,
in this magazine article I've got in front of me here, and it was an Empire magazine from, let me have a look, January 1992, talking about the Addams family. And I mean, you gave journalists great copy with all the trauma behind the scenes of the Addams family. And if I can, I just want to quote you. I mean, I'm not trying to give you hives or anything like that, but if I can just quote just some of the things that went wrong, from this is only like the fourth paragraph. We're not even deep into the article. And they write, February the 1st, not long after Sonnenfeld killed over on the set, director of photography, Owen Roisman, opted and left for another movie. Late February, production had to shut down for several days when his replacement was rushed to hospital, seriously ill with a severe sinus infection. Raul Julia was next, missing several days' work due to a burst blood vessel in his eye. Not wishing to miss out, Sonnenfeld left for New York in March to visit his wife in hospital. After he came back, Christopher Lloyd nearly lost an ear in a fight scene. All this faded into relative insignificance, however, with the practically unprecedented decision of Orion Pictures to sell the entire production lock, stock, and barrel. That's like six very entertaining lines in an article for me. That's what 10 years of therapy for you, isn't it? That just sound to be absolutely in the glare of that. And a first movie as
yeah,
director
as
as
the
well.
first, it was the first time as a director. I fainted on the set, which
Yeah.
is alluded to at the beginning of that
No,
paragraph.
that's in the absolute first
Uh,
paragraph. I skipped that. They start with that. Yes.
right. Right. It was really tough. We went horribly over schedule and over budget. Scott Rudin is a brilliant producer, but his philosophy is don't worry about budget, don't worry about time, make the best movie you can,
Yeah.
which is great if you have the power to pull that off. But as a first-time director, it was really tough, and we were bankrupting Orion.
Yeah.
I mean, Orion had a lot, weren't bankrupt then, but we were way over budget. Orion was going bankrupt, and we were the best asset they had, and they ended up selling the movie partway through production to Paramount, who on a Friday, the head of Paramount bought it, and that Friday afternoon he was fired, not
Yeah.
because he bought our movie. And the new guy came in, and whenever a new guy comes in, he hates all the
Yeah.
slate of the old guy. He wants to make everything and prove that it was his stuff. Unlike John Calley, who when John Calley came in to run Sony,
Yeah.
Sony had a period of down movies. He came in, he had our movie in 97, he had Air Force One,
Yeah.
he had Fifth Element. And someone said to John Calley, how do you do such great movies? And his response was, pick a great predecessor. because all
Yeah,
those movies
of
started
course.
not with Khaled, but with his former head. That was not the philosophy of Stanley Jaffe, who came in after after the head of Paramount was fired. So Stanley hated the movie. So I was also directing the second half of the movie for a studio that hated the movie.
Yeah,
I'll tell you the story. I've mentioned it several times, but in my book. But Stanley Jaffe hated the movie so much that when I was done filming it, he made the head of production take me to lunch on the studio lot.
yeah,
And his name was Gary Lucchese. And Lucchese said, "Look, Barry, I know you have a 10-week director's cut, but just show us a movie now." He was saying this because Stanley Jaffe was saying, "This movie sucks. It's uncuttable. It's unreleasable." So I told Lucchese, "No, I'm not going to show it to you now. I get 10 weeks to get the movie in better shape. If you see it now, you'll freak out because studio executives don't know how to look at rough cuts or dailies or
yeah,
I don't know what they know how to do. But in any case, I said, I'll show you the movie in 10 weeks. And he said, well, if you won't, because literally the Directors Guild of America
yeah.
in contract gets every director 10 weeks. So I said, I'll show it to you in 10 weeks. He said, if you won't show me the movie, will you at least tell me what it's like? And I said, well, I really shouldn't do this, but you bought me a Cobb salad. So I'll tell you. Addams Family is like a much sadder version of Sophie's Choice. And then I
Love this
left.
story.
And
Love
I
this
go
story.
back to my office and my phone is ringing. I run, I pick up the phone, and it's Scott Rudin, the producer. Scott says, did you just tell Gary Lucchese that the Addams Family is a sadder version of Sophie's Choice? And I said, no. He said, why did you tell him? I said, I told him it was a much sadder version of Sophie's Choice. And he said, well, call him back. He believes you. And I said, oh, come on, Scott. How could anyone look at the Addams Family and think I could cut that? How could someone look at those dailies and think I could cut that into a sadder version of Sophie's Choice? He says, studio executives are freaked out. They're afraid. His boss thinks the movie is uncuttable and unreleasable. Call. I call Gary. I go, hey, Gar. Hello, Barry. Hey, Gary, remember when I told you that Addams Family was a much sadder version of Sophie's Choice? Yes, I do, Barry. Well, Gary, it was kind of like a joke. He goes, really? I go, yeah, I was just trying to be funny. Well, then tell me what it's really like. Really? It's like really funny. And then he went, really? Oh, that's fantastic. That's great. So he was equally willing to accept anything I told him about the movie because, again, and Gary was a great guy. He was, in
Yeah,
fact, he asked me to direct Forrest Gump, and that's another story. But
yeah.
he, they just don't know how to look at dailies. And so, anyway, that's Addams Family.
Well, the one thing that's lost a little bit, I think, in the telling of the Addams Family story is just what straits Hollywood was in that year. That was the year the Bruce Willis picture bombed. The Rocketeer had bombed. I mean, I love the Rocketeer, but it just hadn't found an order. Even something like Backdraft hadn't got past 100 million. And I remember that Christmas '91 was going to be the Christmas of Spielberg's Hook. And Spielberg, to this day, I think, describes it as the film of his he can't find anything in it that he likes. And so you then come through as almost like the savior of that year's box office. Certainly in terms of studios, I think the big hits were the independents, weren't they? Terminator 2, Robin Hood were independent, and there's you at the end of it. What was like the 2 weeks afterwards as a Hollywood studio finally gets a hit? Do you get any benefit of that?
I did get benefit, actually. I say in my second book, under promise, over deliver.
Yes.
There's
Yeah.
no upside to optimism.
It's how you are. It's the page right
I
at the
thought,
start. Yeah.
right. It's the very beginning. I love flying under the radar. The same
Mm.
thing happened with Men in Black. That was
Yeah.
going to be the year of Batman and Robin and Jurassic Park 2.
Yeah.
And Men in Black was starting to get good good word of mouth, but it was not going to be what ended up being the biggest movie of the year.
Yeah.
Addams Family, you're right. That year was a terrible year for the business. And Addams Family, which came out right at Americans' Thanksgiving, started to get some good word of mouth, and they predicted that it was going to be the biggest opening in a really long time. And this is back in the early 90s. And
Yeah.
they predicted 12 million opening weekend, which at the time would have been a
Yeah.
great opening, especially for a first time director. And we opened to double that. We opened to $24 million, which was huge back then. And so I remember that weekend getting calls from lots of famous people that I had never met, was never on their radar, but suddenly I was getting calls from Spielberg and Katzenberg, and almost everyone congratulated me on the box office. Katzenberg actually congratulated me on a really good movie, which I really
Oh, okay.
respected. But I remember that Sunday night, Scott Rudin finally called. He was, as I said, the producer, and he said, "Well, congratulations." And I said the same thing I told everyone. Well, I would have loved the movie just like I would love a child. Even if it didn't do well, I would have loved it. And besides, so much of the box office is due to the great marketing and distribution. And I went on and on. And Rudin, who I adore, said, "Barry, if you can't be happy this weekend, your mother won," which was brilliant. And I had no idea at the time how amazingly major that was for me.
Yeah.
You know, I never lived in Hollywood ever, except when I was doing a movie. Sweetie and I, my wife Sweetie and I, have rented 12 houses in Hollywood, but we've never wanted to live in Beverly Hills or do any of that stuff. So I was always felt I was always outside the system, which was probably both a good and bad thing.
So where in the midst of it, if you don't mind me asking, did coming in to shoot the last 2 weeks of Goodfellas? Because I mean, how did that come about? I mean, it's just like one of your stories that again just slips completely under the radar. But I think you shot a lot of the Ray Liotta stuff at the end of that movie.
Actually, it was shot at the end of the movie in terms of when in the schedule we
Yes, that's
shot
what I
it, but it
meant.
was
That's
it's all the beginning stuff of Ray Liotta as a young child.
yeah,
So I actually shot the end of the movie, which is the
the
beginning of the
beginning. Yeah,
movie, which is all the Ray Liotta stuff with Tony Lowe as his dad and all
yeah.
that stuff. What happened was I can't remember where. Oh yeah, it was the Summer of Love. So I was supposed to be shooting Tango and Cash, and I got fired by Stallone on Tango and Cash.
That's a badge of honor.
And
I mean, being fired by Stallone, isn't it?
I know, how great is that?
Who
And
else
I
has
was pay
fired
or
you? I'm
play,
going to
so
write
everyone
that down.
still got paid.
You still got
Yeah.
paid.
No, it
Great.
was great. Sorry. So what happened was Michael Ballhaus was shooting for Scorsese back then, and Bauhaus had an out date, which means he had to leave at a
Yeah,
certain date because he was going on to shoot Mike Nichols' Postcards from the Edge in
it's a
LA.
great film. That.
And they had gone over schedule so many weeks that now Bauhaus had to leave. Michael and I, and again, I was a cinematographer back then. Michael and I both had the same New York crew. So Ballhaus suggested that I come in and shoot the last 2 weeks because it was a grip, an electrician who I knew well because I had shot, they had been on Big,
Yeah.
which I had shot for Penny Marshall. And that was fascinating. I mean, to spend 2 weeks working with Scorsese was fantastic. And uh, it was just great. I overlapped one day with De Niro. My last my here's what happened. There was one scene that was going to take 2 days to shoot, and Michael was only going to be able to shoot one of them. So I was going to have to continue what he was shooting in that same scene. So I came in, watched the night, and then my first night was De Niro's last night, and De Niro and Scorsese kept whispering, pointing to me and laughing. And to see Scorsese and De Niro laughing is really creepy. Uh, so the next day, De Niro is gone. I say to Scorsese, "Hey, Marty, last night were you and De Niro like making fun of me the whole night?" And Marty said, "Yeah, yeah, yeah, sure. Yeah, we were," in that staccato voice. And I said, "Why? Why were you and De Niro making fun of me?" And he said, "Well, look at you." That's all he said. What he meant was, I'm very enthusiastic.
Yeah.
And I was very young at the, Ballhaus, is this German guy with a mustache and always wears either taupe or black and suspenders. And he's very important. You look at Michael Ballhaus and you think, now there's a cameraman.
Yeah.
There is a director of photography. And you look at me and I'm running around and I'm enthusiastic and I'm saying, "Hey, Marty, what if we do this? Hey, how about this?" So De Niro and Marty, who already seemed like they've always been old guys,
Yeah. Yeah.
were just laughing at me the entire time.
Was it as sinister a picture as those two laughing at you as Gene Hackman holding a knife over a birthday cake, though?
That was worse.
That was
The
worse.
Hackman thing, that was worse. See, what happened was, um, I won't go into the really long version unless you want me to, but Hackman had a problem with Travolta because Hackman knew his lines and Travolta
This
didn't.
is your stage. You tell the story you want to tell. This is great.
Okay. So John loves being a movie star.
Yeah.
Gene Hackman hates being a movie star but loves being an actor. And uh and so John, God love him, he's a lovely guy. He's so lovely. He's just lovely, but he just couldn't learn his lines and didn't try to. So Gene was getting first day of filming with Gene and Travolta. It's also, Gene Hackman has a unique script.
Yeah.
This lighting is a disaster. I don't know what to do about it. The sun's coming around. I'll
If it
move this here.
if it
I'll come
makes you
here. The
feel better,
background will get worse.
yeah, we're not making Goodfellas. I wouldn't stress too much.
Okay, all right. I'll try not to stress. Maybe I'll do it myself. So anyway, here I am. Um, don't Goodfellas doesn't count because I was trying to imitate Michael's work. Raising Arizona. I'm sorry, my favorite movie as a cinematographer in terms of lighting
Yeah.
is Miller's Crossing by
Yeah.
far. But anyway, so here we are. It's the first day. Travolta says to Gene, uh, "What did you do this weekend, Gene?" And Gene says, "Well, hey, am I allowed to curse or would you rather I not curse?"
You are Barry Sonnenfeld. You can do what you like. Do you
All
want
right,
me
well,
to
you
say
can beep it
fuck?
out.
Would that help?
Yeah, that helps.
Oh,
Okay,
okay, great.
good. Thank
Fuck.
you.
Yeah,
So,
no worries.
uh, okay, now we're back. Okay, now I
Yeah,
get to tone. It's
got
all
it.
about tone. Directing is only about tone.
I've been reading quite a lot about
So,
that. Yep.
yeah, so Travolta says, "What do you do this weekend, Gene?" And Gene says, "Well, with 8 fucking pages to learn, I pretty much did nothing but learn my lines." And John says, "Well, that's a waste of a weekend. So I know I'm in trouble." John doesn't know his lines. Gene knows all of his lines. And, in a comedy, editing is sort of or cutting is the enemy of comedy.
Yeah.
If you look at any screwball comedies, you look at Howard Hawks's, Bringing Up Baby or His
Yeah.
Girl Friday or Preston Sturges movies, comedy plays in a master. You want to see action and reaction in the same shot. You also want to pace the dialogue on set so fast that you don't have to cut to create pace. You want the
Yeah.
pacing to happen on the set and you want everyone to talk fast. Because if everyone talks fast, two things happen. One, you've got a built-in energy and you don't have to cut around to create that energy. And two, and even more importantly, if actors talk fast, it prevents them from being able to act. And I hate
Yeah.
watching quote, acting on the set. I just hate it. Just hate it. So make them talk fast because then they can't act. They just say their lines.
Yeah.
So John isn't coming in. There's no flow to the scene. Gene can't react because John is stumbling. So it's not going well. The camera assistant says I have to reload. We were shooting on film back then. Now everyone shoots digitally, but the camera has to reload. My wife, who's a producer, has come on the set and she's been watching from Video Village. The other thing I suggest for directors is always direct from the camera.
Yeah.
Don't sit at Video Village. There are too many other people at Video Village with opinions, and you don't really need anyone else's opinions. Just keep the energy going. And also, you get really lazy. You start yelling, just do one more. Well, what does that mean? Why are you doing one more? There's got to be a reason why you're doing another take, or you move on. So in any case, I go to my wife while the cameraman's reloading. I go, how amazing is Hackman? And Sweetie goes, I know he's amazing because this is our first day seeing Gene acting the role. So I go back, we're reloaded, we're ready to shoot. And I say to Gene, oh, Gene, you know what? Stand up one line earlier. I think it's going to be funnier if you stand up one line earlier. Roll camera. Camera's rolling, slate. Hackman says, you know what? Turn the fucking camera off. And then says, you don't have a fucking clue what you're doing, he says to me. Have you ever directed before? You're an idiot. You're a moron. You don't have any opinions. Your wife tells you when I should stand up. So I say to the first assistant director, I say, find out if the caterer is ready for lunch. And the assistant says, it's 10 in the morning. He's not going to be ready for 3 hours. And I said, well, check. And he checks. He says, the caterer could be ready in 2 hours. And I say to the crew, okay, we're breaking for lunch. Even though we're not going to have lunch ready for 2 hours, I got to deal with this. Break for lunch. And I go up to Gene and I said, hey, Gene, I just want you to know, if you have to yell at me the entire movie, yell at me. Doesn't bother me. I don't care. Just yell at me. And Gene says, what the fuck are you talking about? And I said, you're not mad at me. I know that. You're mad at John because he doesn't know his lines. You can't yell at John because you've got to act with him for the next 12 weeks, but you need to express your anger, which means Gene Hackman has probably never suffered from sciatica. And so yell at me because I don't care. And Gene says the most frightening thing I've ever heard. He says, all right, come have lunch with me in my camper. So now I have to have lunch with Gene in this camper. He tells me how much he hates himself, how he wears a wool shirt, which is the way the Brits used to torture people, is like by making them wear a wool shirt.
Yeah. We'll still do that for you.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
So anyway, Hackman took me at my word, and for the next 12 weeks, yelled at me all the time. But I knew he was never mad at me. He was mad at John. And I never, ever could get John to memorize his lines. We ended up using cue cards. Yeah. But it didn't matter because his performance is fantastic, because we literally, Jim Miller, the editor, and I would literally use part of the audio from take 1, part from 4, part 7, and literally would cut those audio takes into his mouth. Yeah. So really, Jim Miller and I created John's performance almost as much as John did.
I mean, two things. Number one, I do wonder what would have happened if Gene Hackman had directed The Silence of the Lambs. That would have been fascinating if he'd stepped behind the camera. The second thing, though, is you had, I mentioned before, the moment where Tommy Lee Jones says, stand next to Will Smith, do what Barry Sonnenfeld tells me. There's a much quieter, but in a strange way, just as impactful story about Gene Hackman in your book, where it sounds like the simplest thing. He sat through the entire film at the premiere, which is something that I mean, even I knew he didn't like watching his films, and I'm a nobody from the other side of the world. So you're watching the film at the premiere with Gene Hackman behind you, presumably still holding the knife, I'd like to think, just for a bit of added drama. But the moment afterwards where he says something along the lines of, well, it's your story. If you can pick that up, I just think I found it really oddly moving.
Gene hates watching himself act.
Yeah.
And in fact, he came in on the set one day and said, I almost didn't come in today. Why is that, Gene? I accidentally saw myself last night. I was changing channels on the TV. I accidentally saw myself in Poseidon Adventure for 10 seconds. And I hated myself so much, I almost didn't come in today. That's how much he hates
Yeah.
watching himself. I think there's probably movies where he's never seen his performance. So we're at the New York premiere. We had a West Coast premiere, but we're at the New York premiere of Get Shorty. Hackman taps me on the shoulder. He's sitting right behind me with his agent and my agent, Fred Spector. He says, look, Fred asked me, he's already in a bad mood. Fred told me I needed to come because we needed some famous people for the New York premiere. I was in New York, but don't freak out when the movie's over and I'm not here. I can't watch myself act. You know that. I go, thanks for coming, Gene. The movie plays, the movie ends, and Gene Hackman taps me on the shoulder. He was there. I think he stayed because he wanted to see how bad Travolta was,
Right.
because he was
Okay.
on set every,
Yeah.
right? So, and then I think he got so fascinated watching Travolta that he forgot he was in the movie or something. I don't know. But anyway, so the movie ends and he taps me on the shoulder, like enthusiastically. He says, it's fantastic. I go, well, he goes, I mean, John, how did that happen? John's fantastic. I said, well, anyway, so the movie ends. We then go to the after party. And then Gene comes up to me again at the after party. He says, come on, we got to talk. I go, okay. And he takes me in the corner. He says, I was going to write you a letter, but that's chicken shit. So I'm just going to tell you exactly what I think. I go, okay, Gene, what? It's over. Just leave me alone. Stop yelling at me. He goes, the movie's really good. The movie's really good. And I go, oh yeah, thanks. He goes, no, listen, shut up and let me finish. It's really good. And the truth is, the entire time I was working with you, I didn't think you had a fucking clue. So I said, well, that's okay, Gene. He says, it's not okay, because if I thought you were good, I could have been so much better. Oh God. So that's the way it ended with me and Gene. But Gene was fantastic because you know what? Gene never tried to be funny.
Yeah.
He's hilarious
Yeah.
in the movie, but he's just playing Harry Zim. He's not trying to be weird or wacky or anything. But Gene was the most intimidating person I've ever,
What I didn't.
one of two intimidating people, one of three.
Oh, Barry Sonnenfeld, you set the question up a treat, don't you? I can't resist that. So in the top three, where's Gene Hackman? First of all, one, two, or three?
Gene is two,
Two.
Tommy is three,
Yeah.
and the third one, believe it or not, which was kind of the worst experience I had, and this is like will get everyone so upset. Robin Williams.
You talk about this in the book, though, about you got Robin Williams at the
Yeah,
wrong point of his life, a very
yeah.
dark point in his
It
life.
was
Again,
really tough.
I mean, going back to the point we made at the start about your book isn't cruel and your book isn't mean. I mean, it's almost quite a sympathetic telling because this is RV, which they changed the name in the UK because we don't have RVs over here. The roads aren't big enough. What do they call it? Runaway
Caravans,
vacation or
right?
something, or something like
Mm.
that. But I mean, it just
Yeah.
sounded dark. It just sounded unpleasant.
Robin was really unpleasant. We loved each other, but I had to go and be interviewed by him because he had director approval. We got along great. We knew all the same jokes with the same punchlines.
Yeah,
Um, and that was so much fun. And then he was off the wagon, and I did not know it, but he
yeah.
was both uh, drinking and using certain drugs. And we had very different styles of working. Robin loves improv
Yeah.
and loves a very open kind of uh, improvisational set. And I like a very controlled set. I have shot lists and I have certain, every shot is designed. I
Mm.
don't like to just pan around and and also because we had all these kids
Yeah.
working on the set, children actors, they learn their lines and they only know when to come
Yeah.
in. They're not improvisational. So you don't want an improvisational actor working with a young kid who has learned the lines and knows to come in. So, like, if Robin's off camera line is what's your favorite flavor of ice cream, the kid knows he's got to say chocolate. If
Yeah.
Robin ad libs and says, "So how old are you?" the kid's thinking, "Do I say 9 or do I say chocolate?" So it was not a pleasant set, and it was partly my fault because I'm such a control guy,
Yeah.
and Robin's such a jazz musician of
Yeah.
comedy, and also because Robin was sort of not well.
Yeah.
So if I had to drive cross country with Tommy, Robin, or Gene, it would be Tommy first, Gene second, Robin third.
Why don't you all go together?
We play a
What a
game.
car journey that would be.
Oh, that would be quite an RV
Cars have
trip.
lots of seats in them, Barry Sonnenfeld, especially in America. You could get them all in. You could put Tim
We
Allen
could
in
get it
there.
all
You
in.
got along a treat with him as well, didn't you? It's just all your favorites all in one
Oh,
place.
Tim Allen and Robin Williams were very much the same person in that if you were alone with them in the room,
Yeah.
they knew more about fountain pens, uh, the Kabbalah, religion, astronomy,
Yeah.
any geology, anything you can talk about. They're really smart. You get one more person in the room, let's say, for instance, the waiter, and suddenly it's showtime and they've
Yeah.
got an audience, and then you cannot stop them. They need to perform. There are three kinds of comedians. There's the Tim Allen, Robin Williams that are always on.
Yeah.
Then there's the other kind of comedians off camera, like Steve Martin,
Oh,
who goes
genius. Yeah.
out of his way not to be funny.
Yeah.
And he will, he's not going to be funny. And it's almost disconcerting how not funny he will be, like at a dinner table or something. And then there's the third kind of comedians like Jerry Seinfeld and Matthew Broderick,
Yeah.
who are just like normal guys. They're funny, but they're not on.
Yeah.
And those are the best kind.
We're running slightly short of time, so I'm going to try and just get two quick things in before I outstay my welcome, because I've seen every one of your films apart from one. And the only one I can't legally see here in the UK, and there is an undercurrent of seriousness here in that there's films like in the last 20, 30, 40 years that are just disappearing, is For Love or Money, which you made after the Addams Family. It was called The Concierge over here. It's not on DVD
Right.
in the UK. It's not on a streaming service in the UK. And so my question to you really is, because I always try and see everything as much as I can before I interview someone, is it worth going to prison for me illegally downloading and watching that film, which is the only way I can see this in the UK? And how you feel just about film preservation and the state of it.
Oh, I worry about film preservation.
Me too.
Piracy is theft, as I always say. So I wouldn't want you to go to jail. I wouldn't want you to download it illegally, but I would love. It's a nice movie. In
Yeah.
some ways, it's sort of like you make a breakfast at Tiffany's.
Oh,
It's
okay.
Michael J. Fox is lovely. Gabrielle Anwar is lovely. There's some great performances by Fivish Finkel and Udo Kerr, and
Real.
it's a nice little movie.
Yeah. So I've got
Oh,
shelves
it's
of, I
great.
should
Udo Kerr
point out,
plays a manager.
I've got shelves of legally
Hmm.
bought DVDs behind me. I do things the legal way. It's just the frustration that I can't see it. And it's like it's not like with the best will in the world. It's not like it's a small indie film, is it? It just should be available.
It really should be. I don't. It was made for Universal,
Yeah.
and I don't know why that's the case. It's not a bad movie. It's not a great movie, but it's not a bad movie. It's not an embarrassing movie. Michael and there are a lot of good performances in it, and it's really visually interesting. There's a really I'm surprised about that. I really
Yeah.
am. That
Well,
that is just not available.
well, if I track it
Yeah.
down, if I import it from somewhere else in the world and watch it, can I track you back down for a part two of this? And I want to talk about this and that and
Yeah.
Big Trouble, which is your big underrated film as well. I think that's the one that like lots of people just have completely bypassed and shouldn't. Your face almost lights up when I
You
mention
know
that.
what, Simon? Thank you so much. I love that film.
Yeah,
It was supposed to come out 11 days after 9/11, so
yeah,
marketing it was a disaster because it involves a it's a really funny comedy with an amazing cast, as
yes.
you know.
Yeah. So so I'm going to come back and try and do a part two with you, but um,
I'd
uh,
love it. I'd love it.
that would be great. I have to ask, just in terms of pulling out one or two slight anecdotes from your book, did Kenneth Branagh really turn up to the table read of Wild Wild West with the accent, with that accent, and knowing absolutely everything?
Kenneth Branagh was amazing.
Yeah.
Anytime you get to work with a British actor, it's fantastic. They are so professional. They know their lines. They come in prepared. We worked on Miller's Crossing. That lead, the Albert Finney lead,
Yeah.
was supposed to be a guy named Trey Wilson
Yeah.
who
It was
played
late, wasn't
Nathan
it? Yeah.
Arizona. And he died 2 weeks
Yeah.
before the start of principal photography. Albert came in with less than 2 weeks before we started to shoot, knew every line, would go out, would go out every night drinking with the electricians, and they would close down New Orleans and still come in the next morning knowing every line. Kenneth Branagh comes in for the table read of Wild Wild West. He knows every line. He's in hair and makeup. He created that trident beard he had in Wild
Yeah.
Wild West and was so brilliant. Southern accent. And the Brits, by the way, the Brits do great Southern accents. Came in, was so brilliant that the head of the studio, Lorenzo de Bonaventura, came up to me at the end of the table read and said, "Is there any way we can fire Kenneth Branagh and hire that guy
Yeah.
to be uh, Dr. Lovelace?" And I said, "That is Kenneth Branagh." That's how brilliant Kenneth was in the movie.
He's now producing Transformers films as well, Lorenzo, isn't he? He's just like that's where he popped up most recently. We are out of
Yes,
time. So in terms of a nice place to leave this, now I'm going to track you down again. You mentioned Albert Finney there, and I know it's a story you've told before, but can you just tell people the gesture he did at your wedding? I just think that's such a lovely
sure.
story.
So Sweetie and I got married at the wrap party of Miller's Crossing. It's a big party you have
Yeah.
at the end. Sweetie's divorce had happened 11 days before we finished shooting. So I said to the Coens, who were renting a riverboat for the wrap party, I said, "You rent the riverboat. Sweetie and I will pay for food and the band, and we'll have both a wedding because those are the same people I would have invited to the wedding anyway." I love the grips and electricians who I worked with on Miller's Crossing. So at the wedding, we're on a riverboat in New Orleans. We're out in the water. It's sunset. Albert gets a microphone. Sweetie and I get married, and Albert makes a lovely speech with lots of metaphors about driftwood and rocks and water. And then the entire Mississippi River lights up in fireworks. Albert had hired a barge filled with fireworks as a wedding gift. So for the next 20 years, Sweetie and I have been married for 35 years. For the next 20 years, I would run into Albert every 4 or 5 years at like some restaurant in LA or something or New York. And Albert would say, "Are you still married to Sweetie?" And I go, "Yes, Albert, I am." And he said, "You better be. That fucking wedding cost me $7,000. That's how much the fireworks were." But Albert is full of largesse. He was just a pleasure to work with. Just a pleasure.
Barry Sonnenfeld, this has been a pleasure too. If
In
I can
fact, I'll
just,
tell you one last thing.
oh, go, go, go.
Oh, wait, one last thing. If you look at Miller's Crossing, there's a scene where Gabriel Byrne is at Albert Finney's club, and
Yeah,
he goes into the restroom, the women's restroom, and it was the last day of shooting. And the day before, Albert said, "I want to be in one more scene," and Joe and Ethan said, "Well, you can't. The last scene is in a women's bathroom," and he said, "Make me the matron." And
yeah,
if you look at that scene in Miller's Crossing, you'll see Albert Finney in the background, totally dressed
yeah.
as the matronly, woman who's like in the bathroom. Um, and I think he crosses himself even when he comes in because he's in the women's, Gabe is in the women's bathroom. So Albert Finney is in that scene just because he loved being on that movie so much.
So you've got me thinking now, going back to Gene Hackman never liked watching one of his own performances. Do you think he got to the bit in the birdcage where he was dragged up at the end? Do you think he ever saw that? He would have got the birdcage partly off the
Boy,
back of Get Shorty.
I don't know if Gene's ever watched Birdcage or
Go and
not. I
ask
think he
him.
got the role because
Yeah, that's
Get Shorty. You go ask him. Yeah,
no,
go ask
you
him.
ask
Good
him,
luck.
Barry. You've got a better relationship with him.
No, no, no,
Barry
no, no,
Barry
thanks.
Sonnenfeld, this has been a delight. Our time is up. Can I just give you the agenda for our next conversation, just so you know what's coming? Um, I paid
Yes.
good money to see Nine Lives in a cinema, so I've got questions about that. I took my kids; they also have questions. Big Trouble, I will have watched for love or money. We've done none of the Men in Black films. I've not asked you about the giant spider and John Peters in Wild Wild West, and we need to check in on your sciatica. That's where we pick up next time.
Deal.
Huge
Absolutely.
Huge congratulations, A, on your motivated lighting for this conversation, which has been a delight watching an artist at work. And secondly, for two extraordinary books, you hint at the end of the second one that there is a third to come. Is there a third to come?
Uh, I have enough material. I'm not sure, but perhaps. Nothing's
Okay.
been decided yet.
Well, I will go and buy another copy of the second one just to try and grease the wheels a bit there. Barry Sonnenfeld, thank you so much for your time. This has been a delight.
Thank you, Simon.